Hello, welcome back, Kendall. We are so happy to pick up our conversation from before. So nice having you again. For those of y'all that were not part of our first conversation, we recently just had a talk with Kendall about addiction, all things addiction, learned a lot already in just a brief moment with him. And so for those of you that don't know who we are, my name is Mandy Rourke, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist here in Austin, Texas. Kendall and I also work together in consultation groups and just in general. And I am one of the co-founders of Zession, and I'm here with my fellow co-founder.
Yes, I'm Sapna Srivastav, also co-founder of Zession and currently a registered marriage and family therapy intern, also here in Austin, Texas currently. And we're excited to continue our conversation with Kendall Campbell. And Kendall, if you want to share a little bit, I mean, we did full longer introductions in our last part one conversation video. So if you want to give an abbreviated one, feel free. Or full detail.
Yeah, of course. So as you put, thank you for the introduction. My name is Kendall Campbell. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Austin, Texas. I specialize in working with couples dealing with both addiction and infidelity. And hopefully I can help support you guys today and getting out some of the greater information to those who are seeking it, professionals and the public.
Awesome. Well, we're so grateful that you're here. And as we've shared in our previous conversation, we're just grateful for this time to be able to talk about these topics, because I know all of us share in the sense that we learn from one another through these conversations. I had so many takeaways from our first part of our conversation, and I know many who are listening will be able to benefit as well. So infidelity, it's a big hot topic. That is a hard one. It's one that can kind of just people don't know where to start when it comes to infidelity. Sometimes it's after it's almost like taken over. And so I'm really glad that we have some time to kind of break down and understand what infidelity is or how it impacts, some tips from you and how you would, kind of help clients who are experiencing that.
Yeah, of course.
So we'll start, I think, again, kind of getting everyone on the same page. Like, how would you define infidelity?
Yeah, so infidelity is a tricky one nowadays. Much like the conversation we had with addiction, and that infidelity used to just be understood as sex between two people where one was outside of that conjoined marital relationship, right? Nowadays, it's not just that. People define infidelity in a variety of different ways. Emotional infidelity with another person or another entity, right? Really, the kind of simplest way that I've sort of coined and kind of defined it for a lot of my clients is it's dedicating or allotting energy outside of your relationship to someone or something else at the expense of your own relationship, right? So that can be pretty much anything. That can be addiction, that can be pornography, that can be another person, that can be work to some extent, though that's not really the common way we experience it. But it really can be boiled down to just that. It's a betrayal of the relationship and the contract that we've kind of established with each other.
That's a fantastic definition, actually, that I haven't heard put that way. And so I love that because it really does open up the umbrella of, what can count as infidelity. But it also makes me wonder then if we're saying that it's that specific part of at the expense of your partner, I wonder if, how easy or difficult it might be for someone to gauge if they're engaging in something that could be considered infidelity, and especially if they're not doing it with their partner knowing. I mean, I guess in and of itself that can be a sign. But what are your thoughts of like how someone can gauge if like, okay, this, I know I'm putting energy into this and it might be taking energy away from my relationship. I don't know if it's actually could be considered infidelity.
Yeah, so it's it's an experience where when I enter a relationship, right, there are spoken and unspoken rules, right? Monogamy is the expectation and the understanding that I'm just going to be committed from a sexual standpoint with you, right? That's oftentimes an unspoken rule nowadays. And we obviously have other experiences with polyamory and non-monogamous relationships, but there are spoken and unspoken rules. Within those rules, we have 1,000 other things, right? I have expectations or an understanding that when I'm sick, you're going to support me. When I need help, you're going to aid me. Those types of things, and every relationship defines it in their own way, right? We have love languages for that, where we have quality time spent together. We have a relational sort of Venn diagram, if it is, where each couple understands that I have independent time and I have relationship time. When infidelity really occurs is when one of two things tends to happen. Either the individual who's engaging in the infidelity or the affair knows that they've gone beyond what is agreed upon in their kind of relational contract, right? Most people tend to be aware of this at some point or another, maybe not early on, but when we start to essentially reap the benefits of whatever this entity is, a person or thing, it becomes aware, right? This is what generates later on in the process the experiences of guilt and shame, right? Which we'll talk about. But on the flip side of things, the recognition by the partner, same sort of thing. I feel as if something is now missing or lacking within my relationship because my partner is gone beyond. And so there's an attention or a calling attention to the distance or the schism there.
I mean, I think people who they're starting to have an experience, and whether that be the person in the relationship that's noticing that the partner's energy is like kind of that turning the back, or they're feeling like they're seeing their back more than they are like kind of the partner leaning in. I think is one thing that people start to sense and start to feel, but it's hard to know, like, when does it actually cross that line? And I think for me, and I think a lot of clients too, it's like, well, I mean, it's just a friend at work. I mean, we text all the time, we have to, or it's someone at my church and we organize events all the time together. Like, I'm not going to not go to church, lots of those, like, these are people that matter to me in my life. And what's the boundary, or what's the limit of kind of energy that ought to be expended or in? I think there's just so much confusion around that.
There is, and there's the term infidelity or affair, and then really what the core experience, which is a breach in trust, right? And so when we talk about how to define it in the sense of, I feel as if my relationship, or I'm going to say that there's been infidelity within my relationship, I'm describing when I've experienced a breach in trust. And so if we understand that there's, again, spoken and unspoken contracts and agreements, right? If you hang out with your friends, great, that's understood, that's independent time. But there's also an understanding that energy that you gain is going to be folded back into the relationship. If it's not folded back into the relationship, and that's the expectation, then that's kind of breaking my trust to some extent, right? Same thing with if I lean in on a coworker to an excessive point, then, and what I feel is excessive within my relationship, and that's not being folded back in, right? So when I have questions or when I have concerns, that becomes closer and closer to breach in trust, which then becomes closer and closer to what we would call emotional infidelity, that specific example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's helpful to kind of clarify, like, that expense definitely feels like a breach in trust, and it can take many different formats, and like you said, kind of can be really specific to the couple, very unique circumstances around many, if not most, I would imagine too. And so I also have this curiosity that I want to get your take on kind of up front.
Sure.
Do you believe that relationships are salvageable after infidelity.
Yes, absolutely. When I started working with couples dealing with infidelity, my definition of success and salvageability did change a little bit, right? I got into the field too with the intent and the focus of reconciliation, right? Where couples dealing with some sort of schism or breach of trust or whatever else it is would still find themselves back in that romantic relationship. That's not always the case, right? The difference is that through a fair recovery process, the end result, the outcome that I strive for is that there's understanding and there's ideally acceptance between the two. There may cease to be a romantic relationship, but there's still some form of relationship, friendship, co-parenting dynamic or relationship or something, right? Um, I am still biased. I still really, really want the romantic relationship to occur. And in that case, to that extent, that is still my driving force. And in that area as well, it is salvageable. It's salvageable. It can work. And there's this strange little benefit in that Esther Perel would talk about, would you recommend an affair for a couple? No, but the benefits of it are that you will become one of the strongest couples beyond in your social setting in comparison to all others, because the process of fair recovery is essentially rebuilding the relationship from the ground up. There's for lack of better words, there's a metaphor that I use with couples that I work with, and that when there's been an identified experience, a breach in trust or infidelity or whatever label you choose, or the individual chooses to describe, it's as if everything is thrown into the air. How you view yourself, how you view your partner, how you view your relationship, how you view your family, how you view the world, everything is thrown in the air. Some pieces are easy to grab and pull back down. My role as a parent, for example, generally doesn't change. I still have to be a parent to my son or daughter or child. My ability to trust, however, maybe not. My ability to laugh, my ability to feel safe, not so much. Those are obviously the things that stay in the air a little longer. But over the course of this process, in the collaborative process, in the collaborative sense, two people get to pull down a specific object that's in the air, look at it, refine it, change it or adapt it, amend it, whatever they want to do, and then place it down together, which is not something that many couples tend to do, if ever. We do that a little bit in the dating process, but that's its own strange little beast in that sense, to where you really get these things over time. You now have 20 years or 15 years with a person to do this with all of that knowledge, all of that experience. And you do that in a way that cultivates a stronger bond in basically every area of intimacy, trust, security, safety because of that.
It's a beautiful thing to share, because I think people who have experienced some type of breach in trust or infidelity tend to hang out in the pit of despair, not because they're choosing to. It's just really hard to imagine climbing out of that when there's been betrayal. There's been such deep, deep hurt with someone who you did have that trust with. And I think that as you're just describing this, it's a beautiful way of being able to acknowledge that through intense pain and challenge in a relationship, there actually can be this growth and this strengthening that happens. And I think that can offer someone who has been in that experience just the possibility of something more, because at that moment in time that infidelity was happening, there were probably some opportunities to be able to have more of those conversations, but nothing to really like kick that into action.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. I of course I always wish that the conversations that we have amidst a fair recovery could have happened to the degree of success that we have now back then. But sometimes, again, you need a pretty intense, or sometimes even in this case traumatic, catalyst to create real change, right? There's just there's no other way of describing it. That this is kind of the complexity of this whole topic. You can have something that's so terrible create something so wonderful.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that kind of in answering that question. You also touch on like, um, salvaging a relationship doesn't necessarily always mean it will look the same, it'll have the same structure at
Yeah.
the end of that healing processing work together. And yet it could,
Mhm.
regardless, it's being rebuilt to be better and stronger and more resilient ultimately. I definitely understand kind of that bias of like really, really hoping that we can help uh, with the relationship as well. But I also remember having to like reframe that for myself of like sometimes the best outcome might not be reconciliation,
Yeah.
or continuing forward as a couple, which can be really, really hard to face as well. But I'm also thinking for those who may be hearing these and like thinking, okay, like how does one even get to this point? Like that, I mean, I would imagine oftentimes it kind of just sneaks up on you too if you're not aware, if you're not having those kind of conversations intentionally beforehand where you're pulling things down, which can be really challenging in and of itself. But like what to you or in your what you've seen come into your office, those that you've seen come into your office, and just kind of in your expertise, do you think kind of contributes to this opportunity for infidelity, I guess?
Yeah. So, by and large, my experience is that it's a gradual process. Of course, there are things, I mean, especially when we talk about addiction and substance use that can create opportunities for infidelity where they weren't necessarily that would have never necessarily been taken prior to that. But again, by and large, it's more of a gradual, slow process, something that happens over really more than just months, really years, right? In therapy, we talk about the 7-year itch, and that's kind of the experience where most couples have achieved quite a bit in their relationship. They're in some level of committed relationship, be it marriage or just long-term monogamy, and this is where things normalcy starts to kind of really take a toll, right? Routine is wonderful until it becomes boring, right? And it's in those moments where a lot of problems can tend to occur. It's not always, it's just an average, right? But one of the things that tends to perpetuate the experience of infidelity, there's this belief that there's kind of two camps, right? What we tend to assume as kind of the layperson is that there's something wrong within the relationship, right? He treats me like crap, or she doesn't give enough sex. There's some sort of issue, right? He's a terrible parent, whatever it is, it's problematic internally, right? That can be the case, and some relationships have a bit of that. I've also worked with quite a few relationships where the relationship, more or less, is a healthy, effective relationship, and it has far more to do, if not exclusively to do, with the individual. I experience in my own life a loss of something. I'm lacking in something, right? You've experienced perhaps, or you've heard of the concept of midlife crisis. It's kind of the same thing, right? Instead of, I have the experience of I feel trapped or confined or bored with my life. I've been doing the same thing over and over and over. And so there's a radical change. And that experience, especially over a long period of time, leads me to engage in something or find something that curbs that, right? Sometimes it is as dramatic as finding yourself in a bar and hooking up with someone. Less likely, more along the lines, it's finding someone or recognizing that someone is paying more attention to you, which gives you an experience of feeling more attractive or feeling sexy or feeling something that you haven't really experienced before. It's still present in the relationship in that experience, but it's unique because it doesn't have the additional component of feeling routine or mundane, right? So infidelity can kind of happen in really one or the other, sometimes both. There's issues in both areas, but that's typically where it happens.
I think that's helpful to hear because, as we were first starting to talk about this, there are times that the lines or the trust is breached, and it's almost like, whoa, this thing happened without me even realizing it. And it takes time for that person to reflect and understand what's happening. And one huge curiosity that I know a lot of people have kind of, asked themselves, or the big question is, well, if you know that you're doing it, or you do have that encounter at the bar or whatever, because you are looking for that, and then the incident happens, then why not just tell me, or why not just disclose that, so that we can just, a lot of people ask, why just end this, or just or tell me before that you're not happy. Let's just, like help me understand so that doesn't happen. This kind of curiosity around, why isn't it just shared that, like, I'm not happy here, I don't want this relationship anymore. And it kind of falls into what you're just talking about a little bit, I think.
Yeah, that question is one of the most common questions that I hear, right? And it's a completely fair question. It's so complex for a variety of different reasons. I mean, we talked about you're having these conversations are inherently discomforting, right? You're asking yourself, and you're hoping that your partner is going to come with you, walk with you into this kind of potential pit of chaos, right? And the theme being discomfort or disconnection within the relationship. That's hard enough. But when we add in things, for some individuals or some couples, when we add in things like financial stability, if this doesn't work, then I don't know what to do. I don't have the luxury of a support system around me. I might be homeless, to be dramatic for a second, but highlight real possibility. Or a more common one, I have a family. I have 2 kids. If this doesn't work, my conception of what family is and what I've been hoping to impart on my kiddos or kid also changes. And so there's in those instances, there's much more grave, obvious consequence. Even on the individual side, who is, let's say, not in a committed relationship, there's fewer consequences. They're not married, they don't have kids, anything like that. You're still having to reflect on 2 big things, right? What the relationship means to me in its infancy, right? And also how this act impacts me. If I have to admit to myself that I've done something that's against my character, it's really difficult to do, right? And even prior to infidelity, to even say, to have the words or know what to say about, hey, I don't think this relationship is working and this is why. Most people don't know what to say. They're oftentimes not so there's my expectation was that we're going to have more sex than what we're having, or there's going to be more sexual intimacy than what we're having, and that's not there, right? That's a common one because it's pretty apparent, right? You either have it or you don't. But for things that are more subtle, like emotional intimacy, right? The rituals that we create about coming in and giving a hug after work, when those things start to dissipate, we don't necessarily know as quick. And so it's harder to have those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I see what you're saying in that it's not black and white necessarily, and it's not clear cut of it is this or it isn't this. And like you said before, it tends to be a gradual process. Some people are just kind of following what feels good, especially like you said, if they're in circumstances in which their relationship is there's a component that's not a need that's not being met within that, or something that's not satisfactory, and or individually they're dealing with something, they're confronting something bigger that is really challenging to confront, and maybe even having difficulty putting that into words and sharing it with their partner, whether their partner is involved in that or not. It is pretty ambiguous sometimes. But given that, though, I'm still curious, and I would imagine, anyone who's listening to this conversation might be curious. This might be 2 sides of one coin. So I'll ask both, and you go in whatever direction you think is best. But are there ways? First of all, are there warning signs that you think that infidelity might be more likely or about to occur or in the process, and or do you think that there's things that individuals and or couples can be proactive in doing to prevent the likelihood of infidelity being part of their dynamic in the future?
Yeah, completely. So I'll see if I can merge the two and kind of go oscillate between both.
Love it.
Um,
Kudos to you if you can.
yeah. So warning signs. These are a little difficult. I mean, this is why so many people come in saying, I didn't see this coming, and how could this have happened? There are far more obvious warning signs, in that if on any given day, when I look at my relationship, I do somewhat of a sit rep, right? I assess my experience of the relationship and I compare it to how it was in the very beginning. For example, if I look at the metaphorical or the hypothetical list of 10 things and 6 of them are not so good or maybe even absent, yeah, big warning sign, right? It doesn't have to be so stark, but those are taking that quick little assessment of where you're at in the relationship. Are you happy? Are you upset? Are you discomforted? Do you feel connected? I mean, those just kind of basic things that we tend to do naturally really helps here to kind of blend it to the proactive side. When you do that as an individual, share that with your partner, right? Disconnection, this is what I'm talking about as far as it's a gradual process that leads to things like infidelity. When we choose to do that assessment, that information is incredibly valuable to your partner, whether they realize it in the moment or not, right? On the positive, great side of things, you do that assessment and you say, I'm great. This relationship is fucking fantastic. And I share that with my partner gets a boost, and then we continue that cycle. Or conversely, we have a moment where I reflect and I say, man, I've felt really disheartened recently because I look back at the beginning of my relationship and we used to write notes. We used to send each other texts that say, I love you throughout the day. And those things aren't present. And that gives me a little concern. That may be nothing. Relationships evolve over time and we change. So where it wasn't a note before, now it's met with a hug and a kiss upon entry, to the house, right? Or to the apartment or wherever it is. But bringing that to your partner to collaborate with them, help them understand, see if that's something that they've thought about as well. Those are the proactive things, right? Those conversations, I think, are difficult for people because they ask the question of, where do I even begin with this, right? How do I do an assessment with my relationship? When I'm working with couples and even with individuals trying to navigate through these things, I tend to focus on the realm of intimacy. I break down intimacy into four components: intellectual, emotional, physical, and sexual, right? When I'm looking at my relationship intellectually, do I still feel that we have common interests? Do I still feel like we have the ability to communicate and spark ingenuity and creativity and excitement about any particular topic, right? These can be things like the weather, and they can be politics and religion. They can be all the typical common ones, but they can be small and simple as well, right? Are we doing puzzles together? Are we asking each other, when we ask each other about our day, the common little check-ins, are we going into further depth with that, right? All intellectual intimacy. Emotional intimacy being, do I know what emotions I'm experiencing? Right? Do I know when I'm sad and happy and discomforted and disconnected and all that stuff? But also, do I know my partner's experiencing that? And this is, I think, a huge warning sign to kind of blend back the two for people is whenever I start to have the thought of, I've had something difficult, or if I have something difficult at work or with a friend happen in my life, do I feel inclined to have the first or second person be my partner? Do I trust that if I share this with them, they'll come back to me and support me in some capacity, right? If that's in question, that's a big warning sign, right? Our partners are not always supposed to be the number one for everything. You have best friends, you have colleagues for reasons, right? I can go to you and say, and talk about therapy and psychology and whatever it is, and I'm not going to talk to my partner about that for obvious reasons, right? You have expertise where she might not. But if my partner is never on the list for that, or is so far at the bottom to where 1,000 other people are above her, that becomes problematic, right? Identifying and having conversation to recognize, is this truly a problem? The fact that this my partner is at the bottom of the list for this specific topic or not, that comes with that collaboration, right? Then the third piece, physical intimacy, right? This is the fun one. This is where people associate physical and sexual intimacy to be the same thing, right? I can't tell you how many times when I'm talking with clients and I talk about intimacy and they instantly think sex. And it's not wrong. That is a form of intimacy. Physical intimacy is all the nuanced things. These are the hugs, the kisses, the holding the hands, the snuggling, the cuddling. These are they can lead into sexual intimacy. These can be the slaps on the butt. These can be those types of things. They're physical touch that doesn't have to lead to sexual intimacy or is not represented by sexual intimacy, right? Recognizing and assessing, do we have that in my relationship? If not, do I know why it's not there, right? And then sexual intimacy. It's not simply just, are we having sex or are we not? Or is there a quota? We've had sex 3 times this week or 16 times this week or once this year, right? It's beyond that. It's, do I know my own sex drive? Do I know what turns me on, turns me off? Do I know what my partner wants and doesn't want? What turns them on and turns them off? Can we have conversations about this? This is often the hardest thing. I mean, as therapists, we know couples don't like to talk about sex. Our culture doesn't like to talk about sex. And yet sex is something that happens between every couple, more or less, right? In some capacity, in some form, right? Do I feel comfortable in talking about these things with my partner? Do I feel safe in talking about these things with my partner? One of the big warning signs is that there's issue with that. I feel as if some sort of fantasy or erotic experience that I have, I don't feel safe in talking to my partner about that because I'm concerned or worried that they will judge me, that they will leave me, that they will do something sort of atrocious like that. In the entirety of my experience, I've never worked with a couple where when they were vulnerable and shared that experience that their partner rejected them, ran away from them, was disgusted by them, right? They might be curious. They might even be discomforted at first, but not because of who you are as a person, but because of it's something that's different than their personality, right? Similar to be political, if I'm talking with a Republican or talking with a Democrat, there's a difference there. I'm going to be curious, right? Feeling comfortable in having those conversations. It doesn't matter where you start. You can start in any one of those topics, and you might even have one solid conversation just on one of those, just intellectual intimacy, right? But being able to have those conversations are both the ways you can be proactive and also a way to assess kind of the warning signs, right? Recognizing things that you bring up to your partner that they were unaware of, and your partner bringing things up to you that you might have been unaware of. So hopefully I blended the two. Sorry for being a bit long-winded, but hopefully that helps.
But it's a really, really helpful starting point, because as Sapna's asking the question around kind of potential warning signs to look for, but then also areas to assess kind of ongoing to be proactive about it, it just makes me think about how as humans, we're already kind of used to doing some of those check-ins, whether that be going to the dentist or going to things. You have your semi-annual or your annual review where you sit down and you reflect, and it's kind of a natural process of how we function in a lot of areas of our life. And as you're describing all of this, I'm thinking like this becomes, or it can become a habit in your relationship of just having these ongoing conversations around those specific 4 areas that you listed. Be like, we want to see if our relational health is as healthy as it can be. And if all of our energy is being, or not all, but a lot of our energy is being directed and like reinvested into this relationship, and to make it so that it's just part of what we do here versus it's this major conversation that we need to have very formally, and it feel very confronting. You know, it's just this, we check in with each other on, you know, throughout the years, throughout the months, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of those things that if nothing is absolute. If you don't have these conversations, you could still have an incredibly successful relationship, right? Much like if I go to the dentist and they ask me if I floss my teeth and I lie to them and say every single day, and they know that it's bullshit, I could still be fine, but I could also have something more severe, right? I think that's the key to this, is the vulnerability of, I have to tell my dentist, much like I tell my therapist, that, hey, I've been lacking in this area, and I have to hope that they don't judge me, or that they don't criticize me, they don't fault me for that. That's their job. That's their focus, their intent, their goal is to make sure that your teeth are healthy, much like as therapists, our goal is to make sure that your relationship is healthy. And from the individual, from the relational standpoint, just as partners in a committed relationship, in a relationship of any capacity, when we go back to those spoken or unspoken rules, I don't know that I've met a relationship or experienced a relationship where one of those unspoken and sometimes even spoken rules is that I have your back and you have mine. I intend to support you and hope that you support me. That's a part of this process.
Mhm. Yeah, and I hear that. I hear that emphasis of like that kind of that first way of getting going within that, of establishing that, is just kind of checking in with yourself and being
Mhm.
honest with yourself, and those conversations too, of making sure that you kind of are aware of what's going on with you, and if not, again, being able to have the vulnerability of bringing it up to, a therapist or a trusted friend or loved one. Ideally, it is with your partner in at least some capacity.
Yeah,
There is that communication that you're having with your partner, but maybe you need to buffer it a little bit with a therapist first,
completely.
before you figure out even how to bring it up to your partner. And also just maintaining that connection with your partner too, and checking in and making sure that you're relaying your needs, you both are feeling good and satisfied within that relationship.
Yeah.
It is a lot to kind of continue to do all together. But also I appreciate how beautifully you did combine the answer for those questions,
Thank you.
because it really is, you did it magnificently. It really is both, both, and like checking in with each other, staying connected, checking in with yourself, making sure that you know what's up with you and you're able to relay that, and also knowing that you can encounter the speed bumps within that process of doing so, or if you're unable to do so, that in and of itself might be a big warning sign too. And just focus on that kind of within the process. um, yeah, wonderful way of framing it, for sure.
Yeah. And one
I was
thing that I think that, oh, forgive me, one thing that I think that is really important, and I think I referenced this in the first part that we talked about, but so often people, because we don't like discomfort and we don't like to do things like assess and see if my relationship is in a good spot, because on the off chance that it's not, then I don't know what to do, right? We think that we need to have the solution immediately, and the reality is that we don't. I talked about how the concept of breaches and trusts, and they happen over a long period of time quite often. The same thing happens with this work. Now, if you're trying to do it by yourselves, it's going to be a relatively slow process. If you're invested and you're having these conversations, obviously a much quicker process. If you lean into professionals like ourselves, then yeah, completely, we're gonna have the ability to ask the questions and guide the conversations to help you think about the things that maybe you hadn't thought about before. And that's on both sides of the spectrum. That's helping you assess your relationship as it is, but also take a look at things outside the relationship that are giving you energy, where sometimes infidelity can occur, right? It's hard to assess those things because, as you mentioned in the very beginning, they feel normal and natural. It's just part of my everyday routine. Having that third party perspective really, really helps. And to help you understand it, not in a judging way, to not tell you, how dare you, can't believe you're doing that, but to help you recognize that maybe that's something that's missing individually or within your relationship, to help you figure out how to gain that back.
So beautifully summarized. Well done. I cannot thank you enough for just giving us some insight into the way that you really process infidelity and how it impacts not just the relationship. I think a lot of times people do see it through that lens of it must be something relationship wise, but I think it's really helpful to expand that and know that there's a lot of layers to this, and there are professionals, obviously people like us, like you said, that can help, but it's also helpful just to kind of lean into community too, to kind of start just opening up and kind of starting the conversations around like, what is this life? Am I getting enough out of it? And if I'm not, like, how do I, because I do feel like that's one big part of this for sure. So how do we find you, Kendall? How do people find you if they want to work with you or just have a conversation with you?
Yeah, so the easiest, quickest way is to go to my website, which is just my name. It's kendallcampbell.com. Within that website, you can read more about me if you feel so inclined. There's a treasure trove of other resources and documents talking about things like addiction, talking about things like infidelity. And then it also has my contact info, has my phone number, my direct line, my email, and then even has access to my client portal so that if you feel so inclined, you can schedule a consultation with me or schedule that session if you feel ready to jump right in.
Awesome. Any
Beautiful.
final thoughts from you, Subna?
Oh, this is so enlightening again. I mean, and I so appreciate your perspectives and bringing your experience within this conversation. I think it's been a great starting point for questions that are pretty common for people that come up around infidelity, and it's not black and white, it's not cut and dry, but there are
Yeah.
some keys here that people can take away. So I so appreciate you sharing that with us and helping us to share that with a much broader audience. Thank you,
Of course.
Kendall.
Yeah, thanks for having me, you too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Kendall. And we look forward to picking up our conversation another time with you. I'm sure there's hours and hours and hours more of what we could discuss here. So thank you again.
No doubt.
Bye-bye.
Talk soon.
Talk soon.